We welcome any questions you have about tonight's film, or if any of you were here last week for our screening of Camouflage, Mr. Zanussi would be happy to answer questions about that as well. I guess I'll start by asking a question of, one of the things we're highlighting in the series is a collection of films that were made now with some history. We're going back 35 years, to about 35 years to this film. I wonder if you can tell us what this film means to you now versus maybe what it meant to you at the time you were making it, either as a reflection of the culture of Poland during the time, or how things have changed. If you care to address that.
Well, it must disappoint you. All artists are very egocentric, and we're mostly very narcissistic. We like to watch our beauty in our mirror. And one of the remedies is not to think about what you have done and forget it. And that's what I do. I try to think about my new film. And what is behind me is behind me. Of course, I'm happy that this film is still alive. I'm happy that in this film, some of my thoughts, of my ideas, of my emotions, I think were rather correctly transmitted. But it is not up to me to judge. And I think only what is my attitude today, and in this particular film, I have shifted a little bit. I have maybe more lenient attitude now, and I'm not so radical as my character is in the film. In fact, I've never been as radical as he is. But it was some sort of my ideal. I wanted to be like him. Not anymore. I think we have to love people more, and maybe the principles which we admire, we must understand that they apply to each of us a little bit differently. And we must care about what other people feel and what their perspective is, and not insist only on principles. It's not a big difference, but it's a slight difference, maybe maturity.
You also mentioned in your introduction that one of the challenges of making this film was shooting outside of Poland at the time.
Yes, naturally, because we had very small budget. It was very moving because the Pune All Indian Film Institute collaborated with us. They were kind enough to help me. So their students or extras are helping me in many scenes. And then in the evening, in exchange, tired as we were tired, we had to lecture in Pune to the same students, and they were willing to take notes. So it was quite remarkable. There was one scene which is cut in the editing, but it gave me a very important lesson of what? Of multiculturalism, or maybe of culture in general. We're shooting in a small village, a scene where my protagonist is taking pictures, and we needed silence. But the whole village was there, and there was like 500 people. So we're shouting silence. Somebody was shouting in one of the Indian languages, the local language, and that didn't help. I asked the students, what can we do? How could we keep them quiet, because I will have no soundtrack? And they told me, be quiet, then they will be quiet. And when we started to whisper, the whole village started to whisper. And they were absolutely, and the microphone didn't take it. They were very, very cooperative. But as long as we shouted, they thought this is the right thing to do.
Questions? Yes, let me come up to it with the microphone. Too fast.
I think that we are all very excited to have you here. You said that you left this movie behind, but I think that this is not exactly true. And I'm thinking about your movie Revisita, The Revisit, which you made in 2009. And as far as I understand, we of course didn't have a chance to see this movie, maybe we will. You revisited 3 of your movies, including The Camouflage, The Family Matters,
Yes.
and this movie, the Constant Factor. So I have 2 questions. One is, why did you decide to revisit them in this particular moment of your life and of Poland's life, let's say it this way. And yes, I mean, can you also explain us how different you see the answers or questions you were asking in the previous movies now?
Well, I have no better way to answer this question than to bring the film, which I would love to do. And because it was the film mentioned, which I shot for my 70th anniversary, unfortunately, it was already 5 years ago. Feels like yesterday. And I have chosen 3 films where I wanted to add something from my today's perspective. So to this film, I added exactly what I confessed before you asked your question. My doubt if this absolutely intransigent attitude of my protagonist is really something what I admire. I wanted him to admit that he was not all that right as he believed he was. And besides, I wanted to show his career, or the fact that he made no career, that mathematical genius has been wasted, but he has a successful life because he is a volunteer, he helps people who have suicidal problems. So he believes he maybe helps to some people to save their lives. And it's not a career that is decisive. The life may be accomplished even if materially, professionally, you're not that successful. And the second thing was that I had both my actors alive, in good shape, and something miraculous happened. I have to confess it because there are some ladies here, that the actress who is, I think she's a good actress, but she's not a beauty, the girl in the hospital, who becomes his wife, 35 years later, she looks gorgeous. She became much more beautiful when she is now after 50. Nobody believes that she was not a beauty when she was a young girl. So I thought it is something very optimistic.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor Zanussi. It's a brilliant film. I love it. Now I think my question is, I noticed that in the film, that, it's replete with censorships, surveillance, supervisions, examinations. I wonder, being a film director working in a socialist Poland, have you consciously developed a certain kind of art of writing under persecution or filming under persecution, as if you're, just as is mentioned in the film, like we're all playing these games with the burdens, with feathers, as if you were playing with this censorship, with the film bureaus, as if they were your best critics. Do you have a sense that you're developing an art that you're playing with or playing against the censorships, the authorities? And well, if I may push the question a little bit open, do you think in Western countries, the filmmakers are somehow unprivileged because of the absence of that?
Well, I wouldn't say they are unprivileged because it's a very false. It's one of the theories which I strongly disagree with when they say that artist has to be poor, hungry, and persecuted. In 19th century, he has also to have tuberculosis, and then he has chances to become a genius. Not necessarily. It is the same true about dogs. Dog doesn't need to be hungry to defend you well. In opposite, hungry dog is not a good servant. So I don't believe these circumstances would determine our situation so much, but the relationship with the audience was very privileged, because audience was expecting, was willing to understand, was willing to read between the lines, and that gave us a chance to use undertones that today nobody will notice, because today we are confronted with audience that is immune, because this audience is watching music TV and all these heavy effects. So they are not eager to read subtleties, to catch one phrase which has double meaning. This was a certain privilege that under pressure the language may become more sophisticated. But still, philosophically, today there is also some sort of censorship on the free market. People, or all producers or investors, will insist that if you are a filmmaker, that you were a conformist, and make things that public will accept, possibly do things that were already successful, do them again. Instead of surprising your public, instead of disturbing your public, this is not encouraged, for sure. At that time, the authorities were they were watching very attentively what are the philosophical consequences of the questions we ask. And in this field, they were very crossed with me that they said, you are right when you show that human being seeks for absolute moral values. But you have to show that there are no absolute moral values, because that's Marxist teaching. There are no absolute values, and the same thing may be good or bad depending on context. Tortures were absolutely approved in a communist society if there were tortures against the enemies of revolution. And they were criminal if they were done by enemies of revolution. And they were teaching us the relativism, and I strongly disagree with this attitude. However, I know that the implementation of the same moral principles in every moment, for every human being, may be different, but values are the same.
Sorry if you're annoyed. I don't know if you're annoyed, but the second question
Please go
is
ahead.
it's really out of my ignorance of Polish history, but oops. Right.
Polish history.
Yeah, because watching this film really reminds me of Kieslowski's Blind Chance about a man catching a train 3 times. I know that film was released like 2 years after your film, but there are so many similarities about man's smallness in vis-a-vis a kind of infinite fate, including the final explosive scene. So I wonder if he's taking leave note from you, but I think the question is this kind of mentality, if there's such kind of thing, among Polish intellectuals about this kind of feeling suppressed at the beginning of 1980s, and what does solidarity movement, workers' protests bring a change to that?
Well, first of all, Kieślowski was a very close friend. He was a personal friend, what is not common among filmmakers, because we are like the conductors. We never work together. You have never seen 2 conductors in one concert. And they usually don't know each other. The same with us filmmakers. We often even don't know personally each other. And it was an exception that with Kieślowski we were really friends, meeting often, discussing all the projects. So naturally there are some elements that we have in common, and I cannot say anybody has borrowed it. It was just our maybe common thinking. And this was a time when the situation was becoming more and more explosive, because this petty corruption made, and the incredible lie that was surrounding us were unbearable. Definitely the dictatorship, communist dictatorship in the 50s was far more dramatic, far more criminal, but also the pressure was so big that there was very little resistance. There was some resistance, but very little. And people were paying enormous price for free thinking. In the 80s, the system was already falling apart. We didn't understand it's falling apart, but we felt it is getting weaker. And at the same time, life was unbearable because the repression was weak. And we are asking, why do we have to live this life, which is filthy on every human level? And that's what we were discussing. And we were both involved, of course, with Kieślowski and a couple of our colleagues, Andrzej Wajda, first of all. We were all very close to the Solidarity movement. We were members of it. We were supporting it. It was a natural national movement against this unbearable system. And then we have different opinions, and we have now different political parties. We have normal democratic life. But at that time, we were all united. because we were not discussing that much what kind of country we want to see, but we were saying what we don't want to have. And we didn't want to have this repressive system, so deeply corrupt. Well, it's very interesting now, because when you see what is going on in Russia and Ukraine, you may see that there are echoes of similar processes. Also this unbearable corruption and the fact that people have no hope, because if you don't have connections, you will never make a career, never make money. So it's not worthwhile to study, it's not worthwhile to work hard. And there is a very strong, growing protest, which in Ukraine was visible in the last couple of months.
I'd just like to thank you for coming here to Notre Dame as well. And most of the questions here have been about your work in film. I was wondering if you could share with us any thoughts you might have, and to what extent you see yourself as a philosopher or a mathematician, which came through obviously in this movie and your other work.
Well, in mathematics I'm totally ignorant, but I admire mathematics as I admire physics. With physics, it was my life disappointment, because I'm still in love with physics, but physics was never in love with me. So I had to understand it and admit it. But I have a deep admiration to science, and I think people who deal with science are somehow very much advanced. They know the world of future. We understand it with great delay. Remember what Copernicus stated was absorbed with a delay of 300 years. So what Einstein developed is still not absorbed. We don't think on the daily life with the categories that he introduced. And scientists do. And what I am fascinated with, but that's my amateurish fascination, is the link between theology and science. And here I follow what John Paul II, who was very keen on science, and he was studying all his life long as a pope, he was convoking scientists to Castel Gandolfo to learn about the state of science. And he made a very important statement saying that contemporary theology should use the same instrumentarium of contemporary science as St. Thomas Aquinas was using contemporary instrumentarium, but we cannot be all the time in scholastics in Middle Ages, especially when we want to face the world of today, which is so different. And we have to talk in by different language. One of the theologians I admire says simply, God is mathematics. And it is not a heresy. I think what he means is that if there is order in the universe makes sense. And that's the answer about the God existence. But it was Dostoevsky who asked the question, said that only relevant question in the world is, does God exist? All other questions are less important. All social, political questions, economical questions are very important, but this one is prior to all the rest. He hasn't been very much understood, but I think he was right. And this is a real question of today. So my admiration to science remains always there. It is there.
So what does it mean in contemporary Poland to be a Christian or Catholic artist?
It's extremely uncomfortable, but it is a new phenomenon. We are, as a society, we are very divided, and our church is divided as never in the past. We have practically 2 Catholic churches, which are one, but the animosity is enormous. Anger is enormous, very, very sinful, and very, very disappointing. And there is a very big pressure now of let us say, anti-Catholicism or very hostile attitude, especially among intellectuals and among young people, against the church. So when you declare that you are part of the church, that already puts you on a very bad position, and that's my case. However, I am very critical of my own church, as I try to be critical of myself. But criticism is one thing, and anger and hatred is different. So it is not that easy at in this moment. And some current of Polish Catholicism today, which is very nationalistic and very populistic, is, to my understanding, quite superficial. It doesn't touch metaphysics, and if it doesn't, then it is not real Christianity. My latest film is about it, and I have lots of troubles with it. It was very heavily attacked as a reactionary film because it is about somebody who's a believer.
Well, if we have no more questions, we just want to thank Mr. Zanussi very much for taking time. We wish we had more time with you for your visit, but we hope that this is just a short visit as a precursor to a longer visit in the near future.
Well, in
Hopefully
my age, I may make no promises, but as long as I'm still fit, I love traveling, and I like universities, so whenever I find an opportunity, I'm available.
Well, it's
Thank
been an
you.
honor to have you here, so thank you.